As the new millennium dawned, the once industry-dominating World Championship Wrestling
Bischoff, damn it all!
was struggling to keep pace with their rival, the World Wrestling Federation.
You are looking at the next WWF champion, and that's the bottom line.
In many ways, WCW's fortunes and future hinged on one key event.
Bash at the Beach 2000. Candidly, one of the biggest disasters of my entire career.
Bash at the Beach was one of WCW's biggest annual pay-per-view events. And in the year 2000, it was the stage for an epic clash between two of wrestling's most controversial creative talents.
And I promise you will never see that piece of shit again!
I think Vince Russo is motivated by attention. I don't know why. I didn't know if he didn't get enough when he was a little kid.
Eric represented everything I despise in the wrestling business. And bro, I'll tell you, you're never gonna outwork me because I'm better than you.
If he believes that, he's got a problem with reality.
The incident at Bash at the Beach 2000 is one in which every participant has their own version of what actually took place that night.
And I said, Hulk, you're not walking out of here the WCW champion. That is not happening.
What's Jeff doing?
Now the script's out the window. What's going to happen? And it's like, nobody wants to watch wrestling and see that. It was one of the dumbest things I ever saw.
And Hogan, you big bald son of a bitch, kiss my ass!
That was never my plan.
Now I'm really pissed off.
Hogan's pretty sensitive about being called bald, even though he doesn't have any hair.
Did I know that Hulk Hogan was going to take legal action? How could you not?
There will come a time, there will come a place when I will tell the entire story of what happened at Bash at the Beach.
The legacy of Bash at the Beach, the single biggest black eye in WCW history.
I despise the wrestling business, bro. I despise the people in it. You cannot be a good person and exist in the wrestling business. You can't, bro, because you enter a Shark Tank. And unless you become a shark, they will eat you alive. My name is Vince Russo. I was in the wrestling business since 1991, so I'm going on 32 years now. You can boo all you want. That doesn't change the fact that I'm better than you. What I'm looking for tonight is ratings. Big ratings. And we're gonna deliver, you son of a bitch.
Vince, we've got to know, who is the WCW World Heavyweight Champion?
Question?
Question?
There is no question, Mike.
There's no question.
Who's here with the belt?
Overall, do you think Vince Russo has done more harm or good for wrestling?
Harm. Yeah, I would say long-term harm. Yeah.
In the 1990s, professional wrestling is bigger and hotter than it has ever been before, as industry leader Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation faces a serious challenge to its popularity by an aggressive challenger, billionaire Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling.
WWF would have been the dominant company from 84 through, I would say, 96. And in 96 it flipped over and WCW was dominant. My name is Dave Meltzer and I'm the editor of the Wrestling Observer newsletter, and I've been covering pro wrestling since the early 1970s. The flaw of Vince McMahon is he only thinks a certain thing works. That's it. And there's a million things in wrestling that when done well can work.
As both companies engage in a fierce ratings war pitting their Monday night shows against each other, the rise of WCW is led by its ambitious young president, Eric Bischoff.
I decided the only way I was going to be successful was to be different. I listed all of the things that made WWE successful, and I decided to do exactly the opposite of what they were doing. I'm Eric Bischoff, former president of WCW. I'm the first one that created a weekly live television format for professional wrestling. I looked at the WWE and they were taped. And I thought, wrestling needs to be live. When it's live, the audience has to watch it. WCW, before Nitro, was just a really bad, cheap imitation of WWE. It was just silly, childish stuff.
The Shack
They were ignoring men 18 to 39. So I thought, okay, there's my opportunity. You know, I began wondering, how can I transition into more reality-based product?
Eric produced a different kind of a television show than had ever been done before. He was just ahead of the game, and Vince was behind the times.
Before launching Monday Nitro, Bischoff aims to legitimize WCW by headhunting major talent, poaching Vince McMahon's biggest star to be the new face of his company.
We're the #2 wrestling company in the world. We're a fraction of the WWE's ratings. And bringing in Hulk Hogan changed the perception of WCW. It was a seismic shift.
I mean, I remember Eric telling me, where Hogan goes the money. That was his thing.
And all of a sudden, my phone rings one day, and it's my buddy Diamond Dallas Page. And he said, Eric, you know, Scott Hall wants to leave WWE. He was Razor Ramon there. So I do the deal with Scott Hall, and about a week after that, I get a call from Kevin Nash. Same thing. Bam, the light bulb went off in my head. There's my storyline. There's my reality.
Here they come! They've got baseball bats in their hands!
The NWO, the New World Order.
What is he doing? God! Is he the third man? He's the third man! What the hell is going on here?
We left WWE in the dust. In the dust. We weren't just beating them, we were beating them badly.
But the WWF isn't down for the count, as fans eventually begin gravitating to a new generation of superstars and a radical new approach to wrestling storylines introduced by a brash young writer named Vince Russo.
Writing a wrestling show is not rocket science. And one of the things I said to Vince when I first sat down with him, Vince, that wrestling handbook gets thrown out the window. And I said, Vince, from now on, they think we're gonna go left, we're gonna go right. Now, all of a sudden, week to week to week, they don't know what's going to happen. The idea of Crash TV is I am writing that TV like the viewer at home is sitting there with the remote in his hand, begging me to give him the opportunity to see what was going on the other channel. So it would be short match, backstage segment, vignette, short match, fight in the locker room, vignette, boom, 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 and you are not giving that viewer the opportunity to, let's see what's on Nitro. That's Crash TV.
Russo's concept of Crash TV plays a key part in turning the tide, and soon the WWF is back on top, beating WCW every Monday night.
Towards probably the middle of '98, certainly in '99, that had reversed again. Now WWE was on top.
And that was a magical period. I don't want to dismiss Vince Russo's, contributions, but they had Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock at the same time. And that's like, the Yankees with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. WCW, by the end of '99, they started losing money. They were the Titanic head into the iceberg.
My budgets were becoming slashed. Eventually, I got let go in '99 because I was fighting that. I was struggling, I was fighting it.
Turner executives relieve Bischoff of his creative duties, while rumors emerge that Russo is overworked and frustrated in his role at the WWF.
Well, WWF added a second show, SmackDown, and did not give Vince Russo a raise, so they went from doing one show a week to 2 shows a week.
I went into Vince's office. I said, Vince, I want to be able to move my family closer to my wife's family, so my wife isn't alone and she has help raising the kids. Because Vince, I'm never home. And he turned around, bro, without missing a beat and said, you make enough money, you should be able to hire a nanny to take care of your kids. You don't tell a proud Italian man who loves his family to hire a nanny to watch his kids. Bro, at that moment, it was over. And they had me up to WCW that weekend.
I was shocked when WCW brought him in as a match made in heaven, or hell, depending on who you talk to.
I know I'm going into this thing with a target on my back. This is the first time I am going to be working with these veterans that have been at WCW for a long time. From day one, Hulk and Eric were like this. I can actually remember locking eyes with Hulk for the first time, and what I read from Hulk immediately was mistrust.
Vince Russo was smart enough to know that you couldn't build around Hulk Hogan anymore if you wanted a future. So, yes, I think he was trying to figure out a way to remove him because Hulk Hogan had so much power because he was Hulk Hogan.
And I've heard the critics ask the question, well, is Hulk Hogan getting older? Well, yeah, Hulk Hogan's getting older, and so is every other damn wrestler in the back, too, day by day.
So there was this narrative that Hulk Hogan couldn't wrestle in the ring anymore, he had no value, he should retire, blah, 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 blah. Where in reality, the business side of the wrestling business still thought very highly of Hulk Hogan.
Taking the reins of WCW in October of 1999, Russo begins reshaping and reimagining the company's flagship show, Monday Nitro.
Vince Russo believed, the more extreme and shocking you make it, the more they will like it.
We are just gonna hump you like the dogs that we are.
Sometimes that's right, but you also run into a thing where once you've done it, you desensitize the audience, and then there's nothing you can do.
Yeah!
What's the worst thing that he's done, that you watched?
I don't know. I didn't watch this shit. I couldn't watch it.
I was there for 3 months. The ratings went up in those 3 months.
How are the ratings doing? Are they improving?
Well, he'll tell you that they were improving, but no, they weren't up. Artificially, it looked good, but every month, if you do the month rating, the October, the November, the December, every month was down slightly.
Next thing I know, management tells me we're going in a different direction. And I said, okay, fine, I'll go home, send me my money.
Now that both Bischoff and Russo have failed to turn WCW ratings around, the network lands on a new idea. Both men working together.
Brad Siegel is the head of TNT and TBS. Vince, I want you to meet somebody for lunch. I know immediately he's talking about Eric Bischoff.
And now my job is to oversee Vince Russo.
Between Vince and Eric, I never felt that there was a power struggle. My name's Jeff Jarrett. Some call me Double J, some call me the Last Outlaw.
1, 2, new champion!
I just think philosophically, those two guys view creating and producing wrestling content entirely different. A philosophical difference as opposed to a personality difference.
Is Last Storm officially in WCW now? Yes!
I negotiated my contract with both Vince Russo and Eric, and I much more preferred dealing with Eric. Russo was the creative end of it, and he was different. Vince Russo sat down with, all right, well, he's the guy that's going to be in charge of creative, and he's looking at me, and he's like, just off the top of my head, first thing I think of is like, maybe making you Eric's illegitimate son. And I look at Eric, and Eric has the same look on his face. What the hell? Like, isn't Eric like 10 years older than me? How is he my illegitimate dad?
I did go into it with an open mind, and initially it was kind of fun. But it became apparent to me that Vince Russo is void of any creative instincts or talents.
You could not have put two of the most opposite people together and said, go.
With WCW in trouble, the company's survival hinges on reversing its downward spiral. Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo devise a storyline designed to play off the real-life backstage drama and the tensions between Bischoff's veterans and Russo's desire to push younger talent.
There's new sheriffs in town. The idea of the program was the Millionaires Club versus the young blood, where all these young guys that were held down, now they're going to get an opportunity to shine.
A little bit of a civil war, creatively speaking, between young and old, because that's like part of life, right?
Get that damn camera out of here!
Despite their efforts, Bischoff and Russo's storyline fails to win over fans or improve the ratings.
Man, that whole year of 2000 is kind of like blanked out of my mind because it was so bad.
It was destined for failure from the beginning.
Vince Russo, I was done with him creatively because I knew he was a bullshitter.
Eric wanted to be in charge. So I call Brad Siegel and I say, bro, put Eric in charge of the show. Brad Siegel said to me, no, Vince, we want you to write the show. Okay, fine. The next time I see Eric Bischoff, Bash at the Beach.
In the week leading up to the pay-per-view event, Russo prepares the show with a focus on who will emerge the next world champion.
That week, I walked into our creative meeting, and I threw a question out there at the very beginning of the meeting, and the question was, if you could put the WCW title on anyone in the company right now, who would it be? And I went around the table, Booker T, Booker T, Booker T, and unanimously, everybody said Booker T. I said, well, then that's what we're gonna do.
I had had the belt at this time a couple of months, and so my overarching creative was for the chosen one, Jeff Jarrett, to face multiple legends and be victorious until it was time to switch the title to Booker T.
I'm gonna tell you like this here, we gonna turn this mother out, now can you dig it?
A lot of significance, a lot of upside, and I saw Vince Russo's vision and bought into it.
So the main event of the evening was Jeff Jarrett versus Booker T for the WCW title, with Booker T going over.
He's one of those guys where you knew he was really good. Wrestling had not been kind to African-American wrestlers. Give somebody else a chance, at least it's something new.
To add more intrigue to the event, Russo makes the decision to give Jeff Jarrett one last win before losing the belt to Booker T. A win over Hollywood Hulk Hogan.
When I wrote the very first version of the show, it was Jarrett against Hogan, and I wrote Hulk Hogan very strong. However, he was not going to win the WCW title. Why? Because you just had an entire room agree on Booker T.
Vince Russo had his idea what he wanted to do at Bash at the Beach. Hulk Hogan and I were on a completely different page. What Vince Russo wanted to do didn't freaking matter. Hulk Hogan had 100% creative control over his storyline and how his character was presented on television.
Back in 1994, Bischoff had lured Hogan to WCW by offering him one of the most generous contracts in wrestling history.
I think the technical wording was he had control of his finishes. It's like if he didn't want to lose, he didn't have to lose.
It's easy to sit here and say unprecedented, but to that date, someone with no ownership, but to have complete creative control, that is a conflict of interest. When a talent has creative control, it sort of comes down to the simplicity. Are they worried about their bottom line, or are they worried about the company's bottom line? It's radically different.
So I wrote the first script where Hulk Hogan looks very strong, but he does not win the WCW title. Hulk Hogan poo-pooed that first script. So now I rewrite the script and I really make Hulk Hogan look like King Kong. Not only does he wind up killing Jeff Jarrett, he winds up killing Scott Steiner. He literally winds up wiping everybody, but he does not leave with the title. Hulk says he's good with the second version. So now I walk into Bash at the Beach that Sunday thinking everything's fine and Hulk is gonna do what the second script says. Eric Bischoff comes up to me and says, you better go in the trailer and talk to Hulk Hogan because he's not gonna do this. Who's in the trailer? Me, Hulk Hogan, and Eric Bischoff. So if you want to break that down, it is clearly 2 against 1.
Did Vince Russo and I discuss it several times? Yes, we did. It was my job to oversee him. It was my call, not Vince Russo's call. He didn't get to vote. He thought he did, but he didn't.
Eric informs me that they came up with a scenario, and that scenario is Hulk winning the title. He wants to win the WCW title.
Eric's idea is to blur the line between reality and fiction with a story angle where Hulk flexes his creative control clause to win the belt as Jeff Jarrett throws the match in disgust. Hulk, angry at Jarrett's refusal to fight, is then scripted to storm out of the ring.
The idea was for Hulk to leave in a state of frustration and anger as a result of the finish of the match, The important element of it was that once WCW realized that Hulk Hogan wasn't coming back and he wasn't giving the belt back, that would force WCW to then vacate that title and create a tournament for a new World Heavyweight Champion. And finally, at Halloween Havoc, which was our big October pay-per-view, the two finalists in that tournament, before it physically took place, Hogan was going to make a surprise appearance and say, I still have the belt, and if you want this, you've got to beat me. Boom. There's your story.
I was pissed. Bro, you're pulling this bullshit the day of a show. I rewrote the show twice. This show is starting in an hour.
It got to the point where I said, look, we're going to get on the phone with Brad Siegel, and we're going to lay it out, and we'll let Brad choose. And Brad said, go with Eric's idea. That's it. Now you got the president of the network, who's the tiebreaker. It was over and done.
Eric wanted to be in charge. He wanted things to go back to the way they were. Bro, I'm not an idiot. So Hulk lays out this elaborate story, and I know the story ends with him winning the title. While he's laying out the story, this ear is listening. This side of my brain is figuring out another story. Because he's not walking out with the title.
Pay-per-view showtime starts at 8 o'clock, 7:30, somewhere in that window. Vince comes to me and says, bro, in his great New Yorker accent, this is what we're doing.
Jeff, Hulk doesn't want to do the job for you. F Hulk, lay down for him, let him leave with his freaking belt. We wanted everybody to believe it. Jeff was not in on it. We wanted everybody in the back to believe this. That was the goal.
Vince was pretty clear, go to the ring, we'll get the bell to start the match. Just make it very clear you're taking a dive. You're laying down for him. And I was dumbfounded. And I said, Vince, this story is not well thought out. It doesn't make any logical sense. And for a babyface to capture gold this way is a real bad taste that if a champion's going to be a champion, don't you really want to beat somebody? And this was the opposite of that. There's a million other options. I felt the audience would say, this is the best you guys could come up with? I told Vince this, everybody loses in this scenario. Everybody loses.
As Bash at the Beach 2000 begins, a storyline is in place for current WCW champion Jeff Jarrett to take a dive for Hulk Hogan. Everyone is ready to put the plan in motion until Jarrett begins having second thoughts.
When it came down to match time, I had a real overwhelming sense of, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to be a part of this mess? Do I really want to walk the aisle and be a part of this finish? Those thoughts went through my mind because my father, my grandmother, my outlook on the industry, that you really only have one boss, and that's the fans.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the year 2000 WCW Bash at the Beach and the main event of the evening.
When they hit my music, I stayed in the back.
But where's Jarrett? I mean, his music's been playing for well over a minute. There's no sign of him. What's going on here? This is not like the Chosen One to stand us up on a pay-per-view.
So my music played quite a while. I think it looped 2 or 3 times. And I stayed over in a little tunnel and really just thought through it. I could take matters into my own hands and say, I'm not doing the dive. I could, jumping and make him punch me around and make him give me a big boot. What are my real options? What is going to protect my family and my career best?
So much at stake here.
I can't say that I was legitimately angry. I can say thoroughly disgusted. And when I finally said, let's get this over with, that was where my head was at.
Here he is!
By the time I headed down the aisleway, everything in my mind was, Hogan, you want your creative control so bad, take it.
You know something, Jeff Jarrett? You are the chosen one because I have chosen you to powerbomb your ass through this match. So come on down and get your ass kicked, Jarrett.
Looking across the ring and looking at Hulk and knowing that he orchestrated all of this, I never, ever looked at him the same way.
What's Jeff doing? What's Jeff doing?
Russo's talking about
Russo, I think, told Jarrett to lie down. What's going on?
Look at Russo was holding the belt up like, do you want the belt? Pin the man. Jarrett's down.
I don't know. And Hogan is as shocked as
What
we
in
are.
the world, Jeff Jarrett?
How does the crowd react when Jarrett lays down?
There's confusion, like they really don't know what's going on.
The essence of professional wrestling through the generations has been the ability to blur the lines between what's nonfiction and what's fiction. But the old promoter adage, you confuse them, you lose them. We confused them, and we lost them.
This can't be Jeff Jarrett, a man that grew up in this sport.
What is going on?
They just threw the world title into Hogan. What the hell? Now Russo.
I'll be honest with you, all I want to make sure is this plan carries out the exact same way I laid it out in the trailer. Jeff laid down, Hulk Hogan, you're going home with your belt. This is all part of the story.
Is this your deal, Russo?
Wow.
That's why this company's in the damn shape it's in, because of bullshit like this.
Referee counted 1, 2, 3, and I rolled out to the ring and went straight to the back.
My God, this is real life. 1, 2, 3.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is not something they go over with us at the production meeting.
No, there are swerves and there are swerves. We've all been swerves.
And we went forward exactly the way Hulk wanted to go forward. The audience believed that Hulk Hogan was pissed, and he took the belt and he left the building. It went according to plan. We jump in the limo. We leave the arena with the belt. We go to the airport. We're on the plane. We're high-fiving, cracking a beer, laughing. Everything went the way we wanted to go.
As Bischoff and Hogan leave the arena, the show continues. But what happens next will be debated by fans and insiders for decades to come, as Russo takes matters into his own hands.
Well, here's Mr. Russo.
What the hell is next?
30 minutes later, the plane lands, and all of a sudden, Hogan's phone is blowing up. So is mine. Russo went out and cut this scathing promo and buried Hulk.
This was like their big, great swerve that somehow turned real when Russo does the promo later, and things ended up getting worse.
There's only one way for me to do this, and that's for me to tell it like it is.
You know, bro, again, these are the things people hate me for.
As agreed upon before the show even started, and after Jeff Jarrett takes a dive, Hulk leaves the building with the belt, enraging and confusing the audience. Now, to the surprise of everyone, Vince Russo makes his way out to the ring.
Well, here's Mr. Russo.
What the hell is next?
Now what?
I don't know. Maybe Russo can explain to the world what we have seen.
My entire life, every promo I've ever cut,
there's only one way for me to do this, and that's for me to tell it like it is.
I don't know what I'm going to say. I am in the moment. That's real, and that's what people believe. Here's where the story is. Here's where my character is. Go.
Let me tell you people what happened out here in this ring tonight. All day long, I'm playing politics with Hulk Hogan because Hulk Hogan tonight wants to play his creative control card. And to Hulk Hogan, that meant that tonight in the middle of this ring, when he knew it was bullshit, he beats Jeff Jarrett.
Because of Russo's crazy booking style, we're all like, is this the plan? Are they working us? If this was the plan, it's stupid. And if it's not the plan, it's even stupider. We're all just in there going, what the hell is going on?
Hey, let me tell you who doesn't give a shit about this company. That goddamn politician, Hulk Hogan. Hogan got his belt and he went the hell home. And I promise everybody or else I'll go in the goddamn grave. You will never see that piece of shit again.
Adding to the confusion of the moment, Russo shocks the crowd by announcing a new main event.
Hulk Hogan now has the WCW belt. That belt don't mean shit. Jeff Jarrett is still the official WCW champion, and he will defend that title tonight in this ring against Booker T, who for 14 years has been busting his ass in WCW and can't get a goddamn break because of the Hulk Hogan.
There were real emotions being fueled during that promo because I had it up to here with the wrestling shit. I really did, bro. I was over and I was done with it.
And Hogan, you big bald son of a bitch, kiss my ass!
That was not on the format. That was not in the production meeting. That was nowhere to be found anywhere until this.
We do have Booker T now against Jeff Jarrett for the WCW title. That was just booked. That's added to tonight.
My plan for the main event. Booker T beats Jeff Jarrett and becomes the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. So Hogan, congratulations, enjoy the title. That's the fake title. The real title is going to be represented in the match with Jarrett. Booker goes over.
We've got a new champion! Oh my God, Booker T's the world champion! Booker T's the champ!
Oh my God, bro. I knew Hulk was going to be pissed. Everybody is believing this. 1,000%. And all I'm reading is Vince Russo finally put Hulk Hogan in his place. Vince Russo finally told Hulk Hogan what should have been said to him years ago. I'm reading this and I'm saying he is going to have a severe problem with it.
When Hulk gets really, really angry, he gets very quiet. Like, when he stops talking, that's when you need to start worrying. And he got real quiet after that. Like, real quiet.
Russo claims he pitched this entire storyline to Hulk and Eric in the trailer, and that they agreed.
Every single thing on that show was what was discussed in that trailer. Everything. From Jarrett laying down, to them leaving, to me cutting the promo, to Booker T winning the title at the end. It was exactly the way I laid it out to Hogan in the trailer.
That was never my plan. I guarantee you it wasn't Hulk Hogan's plan. And by the way, Hulk Hogan had creative control. And we certainly didn't know that Booker T was going to walk out as a world champion. Because Hulk Hogan had that world title and was going to bring it back in October at Halloween Havoc. That was the plan.
Oh my God, that was part of the plan. This is a key point. The reason you have to leave the building is because if I go out there and cut a scathing promo on you and you're still in the building, you're going to have to come kill me.
Russo may believe it, but that's where the pathological part of being a pathological liar comes in. None of that was discussed in advance. None of that was approved by me. None of it was approved by Hulk Hogan. It was just the most unprofessional thing that I'd ever seen in 30 years of television.
The next morning, a furious Hogan calls into a local Tampa radio show, airing his grievances, for real, at Vince Russo.
The reason Vince McMahon is home laughing his ass off is because of these jerk-offs like Vince Russo. That idiot went out there and told the people that he was responsible for me and Jarrett not having a match. He is a very stupid man. But now I'm really pissed off. I don't know how I'm going to get even with this Russo guy. They can pass that stupid-ass belt to Booker T, but I'm the real world's WCW champion.
Did you know Hulk was going to pursue legal action?
Ah! Did I know that Hulk Hogan was going to take legal action? How could you not? How could you not?
Infuriated by the events of Bash at the Beach, Hulk Hogan takes legal action against Vince Russo and WCW.
Because Hulk Hogan tonight wants to play his creative control card.
Hogan files lawsuits for defamation and breach of contract, asserting that Russo's off-script tirade was part of the match outcome and violated his creative control clause.
I believe Hogan felt double-crossed, and whether Russo actually double-crossed him or he just got carried away and said shit he shouldn't have, I have no idea. But it's like, okay, you don't file lawsuits if this is just part of a storyline.
It gets to a judge, and the judge basically says, let me get this straight. This is a wrestling show. Vince Russo is in a wrestling ring. He is cutting a promo on a wrestling character. Where is the defamation of character?
Like, Hulk, you're really suing over this? Shut up. I would not have been a good witness for that. Strange times.
I am cutting my promo on Hulk Hogan, not Terry Bollea. This is a story. Vince Russo is a character. Hulk Hogan is a character.
If Vince Russo takes the position that because he was performing as a character that took creative liberties with another professional, that somehow makes it legal and okay, is a reflection of the man's ignorance. He's got more than a problem with facts and truth. He's got a problem with reality.
And the first judge threw it out. They appealed it, and it went to a second judge.
First of all, I don't think that it went to multiple courts to begin with. It's not like they took it to the Supreme Court, for crying out loud.
The sworn depositions reveal a key piece of information that 2 days prior to Bash at the Beach, a fax was sent to the WCW head office.
I found out after the WCW office is closed, Hulk Hogan's attorney faxes a letter to the WCW office saying Hulk Hogan is not approving that script. I have no idea of this.
Here's why that doesn't hold up. It was never a discussion or a debate between Hulk and me and Russo as to whether or not we were going to do something other than what Hulk and I had laid out. It wasn't up for debate, therefore why would there be this after-hours fax excuse?
I mean, I'm trying to decide between two dishonest people discussing something from 20 years ago to do with the fax. Yeah, I don't remember a fax, but, you know, I never heard the fax story. I'll just say that.
The fax exposes Hulk Hogan's real intentions to maximize the full strength of his creative control and refuse any storyline Russo proposed. Russo triumphs in the courtroom as an appeals court affirms that fictional characters cannot be defamed. However, it's Hogan who emerges victorious in his battle against WCW.
Hulk made the decision the night of Bash at the Beach that I probably will not get renewed, so how can I get another paycheck from AOL Time Warner? And that's through litigation.
I'm trying to get out of my contract with these guys, and Brad Siegel's real snug about not letting me out of the contract, but that's all I got to say.
Well, Hulk Hogan was a key to building the company, and he obviously had the biggest name, but nothing is forever, and he'd been there too long, and he became the face of failure. So at that point, he was getting paid so much, but he couldn't draw ratings to a great degree anymore, and people weren't going to go and pay to see Hulk Hogan matches that they'd seen for all those years. There was really nothing left to do with him.
And then you have scumbags like Dave Meltzer, who is nothing more than a useful idiot. Even though he calls himself a journalist, Dave Meltzer to this day hates Hulk Hogan.
What Hulk Hogan was trying to achieve that night remains clouded in uncertainty.
You know, I've asked myself that through the years. What was Hogan's vision? What was the upside? What was the ultimate plan? Was it to create so much controversy or to get eyeballs on the product? Was it to be his version of a Montreal screw job or his version of a publicity stunt? I don't know. We certainly know the results of it, but I have no idea what his vision was.
and Turner settled. I mean, this is fun because I sat with Hulk and his attorney, Henry Holmes, the day that they settled that. They took me out to dinner and told me what happened. They never gave me the amount. That was confidential. But I know it was well into seven figures.
Some folks play chess while others are playing checkers. The night at Bash at the Beach, Hulk decided to start playing chess, and he had the patience, and he cashed out.
What's Jeff doing? Russo, I think, told Jarrett to lie down. What's going on?
The facts of what actually went down at Bash at the Beach 2000 will forever be murky. But what was clear to fans that night was that the chaos and confusion only underscored the disorder and disintegration at the heart of the company.
It was the reality the night this happened, and it's the reality as I sit here today saying this. In a business that gave him everything, and that's what he gave back. It's about the most self-centered, egotistical power play move that only benefited Hulk. And that's the reality.
But I mean, as far as a storyline based on what they were doing at the time, it was something that would get people talking and could have built to something. So I did like Booker T being champion. I thought that was cool. You know, it's not same old Hulk Hogan champion, right? So I guess I did like that. I do remember that, you know, thinking, at least it's something new.
And let me tell you who doesn't give a shit about this company. That goddamn politician Hulk Hogan.
It was destined for failure from the beginning.
At the end of it all, I don't think the Bash at the Beach was the nail in the coffin for WCW.
You see what it says right here? This is my ass, if you will.
You know what I mean? It was like the gig was already up. It was just kind of a flattering company. WCW was a star that became a supernova and then burned itself out.
In its dying days, WCW is snapped up by its longtime arch-rival Vince McMahon and the WWF. Despite having an attractive offer on the table from a venture capital firm spearheaded by Eric Bischoff.
The deal for us to purchase WCW is for $67 million. We buy all the assets and we get placement on Monday nights and Thursday nights. That was our deal. And I got a phone call. They said, Eric, it's done. I thought he meant the deal was done. Like, we own a wrestling company. I'm about ready to jump up and start dancing. I said, you mean it's done? He goes, no, Eric, you don't get it. It's over. There's no deal. Turner took it off the table. It took a minute for that to sink in.
It was a fire sale at the end. Time Warner wanted to get rid of wrestling. I mean, it was like $2.5 million for the actual WCW, and I think that there's $1.7 million more for the tape library. It was definitely the equivalent of, buying Manhattan for $25.
That's right. I own WCW.
I have zero regrets, man. I have zero regrets. Regret to me is a negative thing. It's like baggage. I try not to carry any baggage with me at all.
I have said this about Vince Russo. Vince is a guy who's very passionate, like a lot of us, and does what he thinks the viewer wants to watch. And he's had successes, and he's had failures, like all of us.
Do you know how little this shit matters? It is a form of entertainment at the end of the day. I don't hate any of these people, bro. This was a job. People ask me all the time today, Vince, what is your advice to get into the wrestling business? And I tell them, don't.
The psychological addiction to the audience's reaction pushed Foley to continuously raise the bar. He felt a deep, unrelenting obligation to over-deliver for the fans. This dangerous mindset culminated just 7 months later in a brutally violent I Quit match against The Rock. According to the accounts of those involved, the original plan for the I Quit match called for Foley to take 5 unprotected chair shots to the head. Instead, Foley absorbed 11 vicious, unprotected strikes. He was handcuffed and completely defenseless. His wife and young children watched in horror from the front row. The emotional trauma inflicted on his family, particularly his daughter Noelle, was profound. She later stated that she has no singular memory of her father wrestling, likely due to the psychological block caused by witnessing such intense violence. The consequences of these decisions are permanent. Foley sustained severe brain damage for the sake of a television storyline. The medical community warned him repeatedly. Independent neurologists explicitly told him he should never wrestle again, warning him of the devastating long-term effects of repetitive concussions and chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Today, Foley battles significant cognitive issues. To fight back against the fading memories and neurological decline, he performs spoken-word tours, using the stage as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp. As we analyze this extraordinary journey, we must recognize the duality of Mick Foley's legacy. For years, he harbored deep resentment that his entire expansive career was overshadowed by the Hell in a Cell match. It put him in a very dark place. But over time, through conversations with peers like The Undertaker, Foley realized that what they created that night in 1998 will outlive them both. Years later, while touring a company warehouse with his daughter, Foley unexpectedly encountered the original steel cell. He reached out, touched the rusted metal, and began to cry. It was a profound realization of his own mortality. He acknowledged that he was incredibly lucky to still be alive. Looking back, we are left with a chilling narrative of ambition, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of adoration. The professional wrestling industry has evolved. We now understand far more about head injuries, and policies have drastically changed to protect the performers. Yet, the footage of that June night remains, serving as a permanent testament to the extreme physical limits of the human body. Mick Foley viewed the wrestling ring as a canvas for surreal, sublime performance art. It was a magical, yet deeply perilous way to make a living. He sacrificed his body and his long-term health for the roar of the crowd. Was it worth it? That is a question only Mick Foley can truly answer in the quiet moments of his life. But for those of us who witnessed it, the terrifying echo of that fall through the announcer table will never, ever fade. There are moments in the history of professional wrestling that transcend the scripted narratives, moments that shatter the illusion of entertainment and drag the audience, kicking and screaming, into the cold, unforgiving realm of reality. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation King of the Ring pay-per-view event, the world witnessed one of those very moments. It was a match that would forever etch its name into the darkest and most legendary chapters of wrestling history. The Undertaker versus Mankind. The structure was Hell in a Cell. When you hear the words Hell in a Cell, it hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. The steel structure was designed to be the ultimate unforgiving battleground. The fans in the Pittsburgh Civic Arena knew it was going to be intense. The commentators knew it was going to be dangerous. But no one, absolutely no one, knew it was going to be that crazy. In that ring, you had two talents who thrived on pushing the envelope. Two men who walked the razor's edge until they completely fell over it. People often say that professional wrestling is a coordinated dance of athletes. But as the events of that night proved, you cannot fake gravity. Many veterans of the industry have admitted that they have been frightened by a lot of things in professional wrestling, but nothing frightened them quite as much as what transpired on that June evening. What left fans and seasoned professionals stunned was the unrelenting punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, endured. Until you saw it with your own two eyes, you simply did not believe that a human being could physically subject themselves to such trauma and live to talk about it. The match was real. The pain was real. The drama was absolutely real. Backstage, producers and peers were cursing, screaming, and calling him an absolute idiot. Why are you doing this? What possesses a man to take his life into his own hands for the sake of an audience? Today, Hell in a Cell persists as both an epic triumph of storytelling and a grim cautionary tale. According to those who were behind the curtain, they dodged bullets that day. Not just one bullet, but several. Looking back, it is truly crazy to think that a major promotion would allow someone to lose consciousness in the middle of a bout and then simply allow the match to continue. But to understand the collateral damage that ensued, to answer the question of when it stops and when it is enough, we have to understand the man behind the madness. As they say, you pay all day long for the decisions you make for your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but everyone who witnessed it must ask themselves one haunting question. Was it worth it? Everyone who enters the wrestling business is looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the answer was rooted in a deep psychological need. Growing up, he was teased mercilessly. That isolation bred an overwhelming need to be liked, a desperate hunger for acceptance that would eventually drive him to capture the World Wrestling Federation Championship. According to Foley himself, the seeds of his hardcore persona were planted during his sophomore year of college. In a desperate bid for attention, he took a swig of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete dorm room floor. When he hit the ground, he spat the blood concoction out for everyone to see. The reaction was immediate. A girl in the room yelled that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen. In that moment, Mick Foley felt power. He realized a fundamental truth about his own psychology. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He just needed to get a reaction. This was the birth of the hardcore legend. He survived hell in a cell, but the road to that cell was paved with years of unspeakable physical sacrifice. Today, that match serves as a perfect gateway for new fans. Countless viewers are shown that bout as their introduction to the industry, only to ask if all matches are like that. The answer, of course, is no. A normal Mick Foley match before his arrival in the World Wrestling Federation was a spectacle of brutality. Whether he was wrestling as Cactus Jack or his other personas, his matches featured blood, thumbtacks, and fire. According to wrestling historians and his own family, he would put his body through unimaginable torment. He was blown up by explosives in Japan, speared through flaming tables, and took brutal falls directly onto concrete floors. His daughter, Noelle Foley, has noted that her father simply loved getting a horrified reaction from the crowd. Realism was his biggest tool. Foley did not believe he was having a good match unless he had physical trouble walking back to his hotel room. It was not that he enjoyed the pain itself. Rather, he enjoyed the fact that he could take the punishment and sell it in a way that entertained the masses. But what kind of man chooses this life? Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, saw a different side of him. When she first met Mick, she noticed his eyes. She saw a gentle, kind person hidden behind a battered exterior. It was his corny jokes and terrible humor that won her heart. So much so that their wedding song was Beauty and the Beast. They were a team. Colette understood his commitment to his craft. She knew that when the adrenaline was pumping, his only desire was for the fans to leave talking about how great the show was, even at his own immense risk. That drive pushed him to develop the Cactus Jack persona, a wild and unpredictable character who possessed an undeniable charisma. You could not take your eyes off him. Jim Cornette, who worked as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation during the Hell in a Cell era, praised Foley for his incredible grasp of ring psychology. Foley knew that audiences craved chaos. By going against the script and appearing entirely out of control, he could take the fans on a psychological ride, drawing all the attention to himself and growing his reputation. His dedication was absolute. In his early days, his bedroom furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor and a small black and white television with a broken videocassette recorder. He would sit there and watch 12 hours of Japanese death matches a day. He was captivated by the storytelling, the idea that a wrestler must defeat not only their opponent, but their violent surroundings. For a time, Foley believed Japan was where he would make his living. The Japanese promoters were looking for a foreigner to feud with the legendary Terry Funk. Funk, widely considered one of the greatest of all time for his ability to make crowds suspend their disbelief, became a mentor to Foley. Together, they engaged in explosive, bloody death matches that pushed the boundaries of human endurance. Foley was drawn to the wild style, often crawling on his hands and knees through broken glass, viewing the pain as proof that he had created something special. Because of this extreme style, Foley never saw himself fitting into the World Wrestling Federation. During that period, the company was heavily sanitized, producing content that was far removed from the violent spectacles of Japan. Vince McMahon, the chairman of the company, had no interest in Mick Foley. According to industry insiders like Jim Ross, McMahon did not think Foley was marketable or visually appealing. It was Jim Ross, acting as the vice president of talent relations, who finally convinced McMahon to take a chance on the young brawler. Ross needed fresh opponents for The Undertaker, one of the biggest stars in the history of the business. For too long, McMahon had relied on matching The Undertaker against slow, giant opponents, which often resulted in dull encounters. Ross argued that what The Undertaker truly needed was a lunatic. Legend has it that McMahon slammed his hand on a desk and agreed to hire Foley, but on one strict condition: they had to cover his face. McMahon claimed that no one knew him and that he was a nobody. From this corporate mandate, the character of Mankind was born. Jerry Briscoe, a Hall of Fame producer, recalled the monumental challenge of building a character out of thin air. But the bizarre, self-mutilating persona of Mankind worked. And it worked precisely because Mick Foley was the man behind the leather mask. Foley understood that without a genuine emotional connection to the audience, a character is meaningless. Fans can sense true commitment, and Foley was willing to try absolutely anything. As one producer noted, he did not turn anything down but the bed covers. The challenge for the company then became keeping him from destroying himself. Foley and The Undertaker built a tremendous foundation together, wrestling in 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches all over the globe. But by the summer of 1998, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He needed to do something drastic to elevate their legacy. The producers planned to reignite the feud at the King of the Ring event using the Hell in a Cell concept. Traditional cage matches in the company required competitors to escape by climbing over the top or walking through the door. The Hell in a Cell was different. It had a roof. 2 men go in, and only one comes out. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had been a masterpiece, setting a nearly impossible standard. Foley watched that first match with his jaw wide open, realizing he lacked the athletic ability to replicate the acrobatics of Shawn Michaels. Seeking advice, he turned to his mentor, Terry Funk. During a brainstorming session, Funk jokingly suggested that Foley should start the match on top of the cell and get thrown off. Funk laughed, but Foley did not. He looked at his mentor and realized that he could actually survive such a fall. The idea consumed him. He pitched the concept of being thrown off the roof to McMahon and The Undertaker. The Undertaker was hesitant, not fully on board with throwing his opponent off a steel structure. But Foley was relentless. He convinced them that he could do it safely. He did not view this match as the second act of his career. He was simply trying to keep his head above water, fully believing that when this run was over, his career would be finished. On June 28, 1998, 16,000 fans packed the Pittsburgh Civic Arena. The pressure on Foley was immense. He had to outdo the legendary Shawn Michaels match, and he was far from the most nimble athlete on the roster. Backstage, producers like Jerry Briscoe and referees like Jimmy Corderas watched the monitors in tense anticipation. The fans in the arena and the commentators at ringside, Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, were completely in the dark. Foley wanted to start the match in a way no one had ever seen before. When Foley's music hit, instead of entering the cage, he began to climb the outer wall. The shock in the arena was palpable. When he reached the top, he waited for The Undertaker. Despite assuring management that he was comfortable up there, Foley later admitted he was terrified of heights. As The Undertaker climbed up to meet him, a new, unforeseen danger emerged. The top of the cage had been secured with plastic zip ties. With 600 pounds of human weight shifting on the steel mesh, the panels began to give way, sinking by a foot with every step. The sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. Foley attempted to execute a maneuver on top of the cell, but The Undertaker quickly stopped it, realizing the very real danger that they would both crash straight through the fragile roof. The brawl moved toward the edge of the cage, directly above the Spanish announce tables. Observers in the back thought there was no way Foley would actually take the tumble. The margin for error was terrifyingly small. From nearly 20 feet in the air, the announce table looked like a tiny dollhouse. And then it happened. The Undertaker grabbed Foley and flung the 300-pound man off the edge of the steel monolith. For those watching, time seemed to slow down, yet the fall was over in the blink of an eye. The sickening crash of human flesh and bone obliterating the wooden table echoed through the arena. The reaction was one of pure, unadulterated horror. Backstage, the locker room exploded in concern. It was like witnessing a horrific car crash. Many seasoned veterans thought Mick Foley was dead. No one in the history of the business had ever attempted a stunt of this magnitude. At ringside, Jim Ross delivered the iconic call, questioning if they had just witnessed what they thought they saw. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savinovic, barely managed to dive out of the way before Foley's body destroyed his workstation. Fans and officials surrounded the wreckage. Terry Funk was the first to reach the body, desperately checking to see if his friend was still conscious. Dr. Francois Petit, the company's medical professional, rushed from the back. Foley had landed terribly on his back, aggravating a dislocated shoulder. EMTs brought a stretcher to ringside, struggling to navigate the chaotic scene. They loaded Foley onto the gurney. The match appeared to be over, but as they wheeled him up the aisle, something shifted in Foley's mind. The adrenaline took hold. He realized that the longer he stayed on television, the more the audience was captivated. Against the pleas of medical staff and company officials, Mick Foley rolled off the stretcher. Covered in bruises and visibly broken, he began to march back toward the cell. Backstage, everyone was screaming for him to stop. They thought he was the craziest, most foolish man in the industry. Yet, as he began to scale the cage a second time, the audience realized they were witnessing the birth of an absolute legend. The next sequence of events was supposed to be much safer. The plan called for The Undertaker to perform a chokeslam on the roof of the cage, causing the mesh to sag dramatically, creating a powerful visual. But the structural integrity of the cage had already been compromised. When The Undertaker drove Foley into the steel mesh, the zip ties failed completely. The panel gave way, and Foley plummeted through the roof, free falling directly into the center of the ring. This was the accident. This was the moment where everything went horribly wrong. There was no table to break his fall this time. He hit the solid ring canvas, a surface that provides almost no cushion over the hard wood and steel construction beneath it. To make matters worse, a heavy steel folding chair that had been resting on the roof fell through the hole right behind him, striking him directly in the face upon impact. Those watching backstage were paralyzed with fear. Foley's family, watching at home, descended into panic. His wife Colette was furious, feeling betrayed that he had not told her about a second massive fall, unaware that the fall was entirely accidental. For the first time in his career, Mick Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. Officials flooded the ring. Dr. Petit, Terry Funk, and others rushed to his side. The Undertaker stared down from the top of the cage, later admitting he thought he might have killed his opponent. He instructed Funk to check if Foley was still breathing. Foley was unresponsive for 42 agonizing seconds. To buy time for the medical staff, Terry Funk bravely engaged The Undertaker in an unscripted physical altercation. drawing the attention away from the motionless body on the mat. By modern medical standards, the match would have been immediately terminated. But in that era, matches were rarely stopped. When Foley finally regained consciousness, the first thing he saw was Terry Funk's shoes. Disoriented and severely concussed, he willed himself to his feet. He was a horrific mess. He had sustained a massive wound below his lip. In a testament to his twisted dedication to his craft, Foley realized that he could stick his tongue through the hole in his face, creating a gruesome visual for the television cameras. As he smiled for the crowd, a chilling detail was captured on film. One of his teeth, dislodged by the falling chair, had somehow become lodged inside his nostril. The match continued. In a final display of macabre theater, Foley introduced thousands of metal thumbtacks into the ring. He intentionally absorbed the punishment, ensuring his body was covered in the sharp pins. After 17 minutes of pure carnage, The Undertaker finally mercifully ended the bout. The crowd of 16,000 went absolutely insane. They knew they had witnessed a man risk his very life for their entertainment. That sacrifice forged an unbreakable bond between Mick Foley and the wrestling audience. But the aftermath was sobering. Backstage, Vince McMahon approached Foley. He thanked him for what he had done for the company, but sternly demanded that Foley never do anything like it again. The physical toll was staggering. Foley suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney, lost teeth, and required 15 stitches just to close the wound on his face. The trauma extended far beyond his own body. Colette Foley had to wait hours for a phone call to confirm her husband was alive, screaming at him when he finally reached out. From that night forward, the trust was broken, and she lived in constant fear of his performances. The Hell in a Cell match catapulted Foley to superstardom. Within 6 months, the man McMahon once deemed unmarketable was the world champion. But the bar had been raised to an impossible height. Foley felt an overwhelming pressure to live up to the hardcore legend moniker. Just 7 months later, Foley pushed his physical limits again in a brutal I Quit match against The Rock. The match was designed to be violent, but it quickly spiraled out of control. Handcuffed and defenseless, Foley had instructed The Rock to hit him hard. The plan called for a handful of chair shots to the head, but in the heat of the moment, Foley absorbed 11 unprotected, full-force strikes from a solid steel chair. His family was seated in the front row. His young children, unable to distinguish between the scripted narrative and the very real violence, were subjected to horrific psychological trauma. They watched their father suffer legitimate brain damage for the sake of a television angle. The consequences of these decisions echo loudly today. Medical professionals warned Foley time and time again to stop. A company neurologist plainly told him that he should never step into a wrestling ring again. But Foley, addicted to the roar of the crowd, continually sought to delay the inevitable. Today, the wrestling industry possesses a much deeper understanding of head injuries and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, commonly known as CTE. The trauma Foley absorbed is equivalent to surviving multiple 25-mile-per-hour car crashes. Foley himself has admitted to experiencing memory loss, sometimes forgetting where he lives while driving his car. His daughter Noelle worries every single day about what his neurological health will look like in 10 or 20 years. Foley acknowledges the terrifying reality of his situation, but he refuses to succumb to fear. He actively works to keep his mind sharp, touring the country doing spoken word shows, performing mental gymnastics to stimulate his brain and maintain his connection to the audience he sacrificed so much for. When reflecting on his career, Foley admits that he dressed in wild costumes and engaged in fantasy combat for the acceptance of total strangers. He craved the reactions, the wide eyes, the deafening roar of the arena. For years, he harbored resentment that his entire legacy was defined by the Hell in a Cell match, feeling that his other accomplishments were overshadowed. But a conversation with The Undertaker changed his perspective. The Undertaker told him that what they created that night in Pittsburgh would outlive them both. It was a profound truth. Years later, while visiting the company archives with his daughter, Foley stumbled upon the original Hell in a Cell structure. The man who absorbed the most violent punishment in sports entertainment history reached out, touched the cold steel, and began to cry. It was a visceral reaction to a structure that nearly ended his life, yet immortalized his name. Looking back, the data forces us to confront a complex reality. The injuries, the trauma, the long-term neurological damage. By any rational standard, the price was far too high. Yet, Mick Foley maintains that he felt the world had offered him a canvas to create a surreal, sublime form of performance art. It was a magical way to make a living, providing him with some of the most powerful feelings a human being can experience. But as the dark side of the ring reveals, those moments of glory demand a terrible payment. Mick Foley survived the cell, but he will carry the scars of that survival for the rest of his life. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. When you sit at the commentary desk for as long as I have, watching the landscape of professional wrestling shift and evolve, you bear witness to moments of incredible triumph and unspeakable tragedy. But rarely do you see an event where those two extremes collide so violently that they change the industry forever. We are going back to June 28th, 1998. The event was the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view. The matchup was The Undertaker versus Mankind. The battleground was a demonic structure known as Hell in a Cell. According to the accounts of everyone involved, what transpired that night in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, hit the collective consciousness of the wrestling world like a heavy mallet. We always knew this concept was going to be intense, but nobody, not the fans, not the executives, and certainly not the broadcasters, could have predicted the sheer magnitude of the chaos. We had two unique talents out there, performers who made a living by pushing the envelope until it teetered precariously over the edge. People often say that professional wrestling is a scripted performance, but you cannot fake gravity. Over the years, I have been frightened by many things inside the squared circle, but nothing frightened me as much as what we witnessed that night. What left the fans absolutely stunned was the unrelenting, sheer punishment that Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, endured. Until you saw it with your own eyes, you simply would not believe that a human being could physically subject themselves to this level of trauma and live to tell the tale. The match was real. The pain was real. The drama was overwhelmingly real. Looking back at the footage, you can hear the raw emotion of the observers, cursing, screaming, and questioning why any man would be such a foolish idiot to do this to his own body. Why was he doing this? That is the central question of this investigative look into one of wrestling's most infamous matches. Today, the legacy of this Hell in a Cell encounter persists as an epic success, but equally as a dark, grim cautionary tale. As those backstage noted, the industry dodged multiple fatal bullets that day. It remains genuinely crazy to think that officials would allow a competitor to lose consciousness and then simply continue the match. The collateral damage that ensued from these decisions is a completely different story. When does it stop? When is it enough? The harsh reality of this business is that you pay all day long for the decisions you make during your 15 minutes in the spotlight. It was a dangerously crazy masterpiece, but every single one of us needs to look in the mirror and ask, was it truly worth it? To understand the match, we must analyze the psychology of the man. Everyone who enters the professional wrestling business is searching for something they find missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the roots of his physical sacrifices trace back to a deep psychological need. According to his own testimony, he was teased relentlessly in his youth, which created an overwhelming, desperate need to be liked. He wanted to capture that World Wrestling Federation championship, but more importantly, he wanted a reaction. The documents and interviews point to a telling incident from his sophomore year in college. Foley took a swig of red food coloring, climbed up, and executed a spectacular leap off a bed, crashing onto a stuffed atom on a hard concrete floor. When he hit the ground, he spit out that fake blood concoction in front of everyone in his dormitory. When a female student yelled out that it was the most disgusting thing she had ever seen, Foley did not feel shame. He felt power. He reasoned that if he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He simply needed to get reactions. He needed to be noticed. This man would eventually become the hardcore legend. He is the man who survived hell in a cell. If you study the history of the sport, this specific hell in a cell match serves as the ultimate gateway. Countless fans cite it as the very first match they were ever shown, the spectacle that hooked them into the business. But as commentators and historians quickly point out, it sets an impossible standard. New viewers expect every match to be a car crash of that magnitude, and they simply are not. However, a normal Mick Foley match was never truly normal. His style was inherently hardcore and brutal. He utilized thumbtacks, fire, and barbed wire. He traveled to Japan and competed in matches where he was blown up by composition for military explosives. He was speared through tables completely engulfed in flames. He took horrific falls directly onto exposed concrete. He put his body through an unimaginable amount of trauma just to elicit a gasp from the audience. As his daughter, Noelle Foley, reflects, her father was addicted to generating that visceral reaction, the shock and awe from a crowd that could not believe what they were witnessing. Realism was his primary tool. Foley once admitted that he did not believe he had a successful match unless he struggled to walk back to his hotel room. He did not necessarily enjoy the pain itself, but he deeply enjoyed his ability to endure it and sell it to the audience in a way that entertained them, even when he was hanging himself in the ring ropes. But what about the toll it takes on the people behind the curtain? Colette Foley, who has known Mick for over 35 years, had to ask herself early on if she truly wanted to get mixed up in this dangerous lifestyle. When she first met him, she looked into his eyes and saw a gentle, kind person. She fell in love with his terrible humor and his corny jokes. Their wedding song was the classic theme from Beauty and the Beast. They were a solid team, and she completely understood his commitment to his craft. She knew that once the adrenaline started pumping through his veins, his only drive was to ensure the fans left the arena talking about how spectacular the show was, completely at the expense of his own physical safety. That dangerous drive forced him to push boundaries and get increasingly crazy along the way. This drive gave birth to a character known as Cactus Jack. Cactus Jack was wild. He was unhinged. When you watched him, you genuinely thought he might be clinically insane. Yet he possessed an undeniable charisma that made it impossible to take your eyes off him. Jim Cornette, a legendary manager who was working as an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation during the time of this Hell in a Cell match, provides crucial analytical insight into Foley's mind. Cornette noted that Foley was an absolute master of ring psychology. Foley understood that the paying audience craved a performer who appeared completely out of control, someone who would bite his opponents and seemingly go off the written script. By taking the fans on that unpredictable, violent ride, Foley could meticulously elicit the exact emotional response he desired. Consequently, all the attention shifted to him, and his renegade reputation grew exponentially. To hone this craft, Foley lived in incredibly humble conditions. His bedroom furniture consisted merely of a mattress on the floor and a black and white television set hooked up to a barely functioning video cassette recorder. Inside that machine were tapes of Japanese professional wrestling. Foley would sometimes sit and study those tapes for 12 hours a day. He was captivated by the realism and the storytelling. In his mind, wrestling was not just a battle between two men. It was a struggle to survive and defeat the physical surroundings. At the time, he genuinely believed that Japan was the only place where he would be able to make a sustainable living. The Japanese promoters were actively searching for a foreign talent capable of feuding with the legendary Terry Funk. Terry Funk is widely regarded by historians as one of the greatest performers of all time, specifically because of his uncanny ability to make an audience suspend their disbelief in an instant. Funk eventually became a mentor to Foley, and the two began working together in a series of incredibly explosive, bloody, and violent death matches overseas. Foley was naturally drawn to this wild style, literally crawling on his hands and knees through wreckage, viewing his injuries as definitive proof that he had accomplished something truly special. He viewed this extreme violence as the only avenue to make himself stand out in a crowded industry. Because of his unconventional look and style, Foley never envisioned himself becoming a superstar in the World Wrestling Federation. During that specific era, the World Wrestling Federation was not producing the edgy content we see today. It was a general audience-rated era, characterized by a very bland, family-friendly product. For someone as brutal as Mick Foley, his style simply did not gel with what the corporation was trying to sell to the masses. According to Al Snow, a former superstar and Foley's travel partner, the chairman of the company, Vince McMahon flatly did not want to hire Mick Foley. McMahon believed Foley was not marketable and did not possess the traditional attractive physique required for television. It took the relentless advocacy of Jim Ross, who was serving as the vice president of talent relations at the time, to change the course of history. Ross pleaded with McMahon to trust his eye for talent, insisting that he saw something special in Foley. Ross was desperately searching for captivating opponents to face The Undertaker, who was undeniably one of the biggest box office draws in the history of the sport. Historically, McMahon had continuously paired The Undertaker with massive, lumbering giants, which often resulted in dull, plodding matches. Ross argued that what The Undertaker truly needed was not a giant, but a complete lunatic. The turning point came when McMahon allegedly slammed his hand down on a table in frustration, agreeing to bring Foley in, but under one strict condition: they had to cover up his face. McMahon was adamant that the audience should not know who he was or anything about his past. In the chairman's eyes, Foley was a nobody. WWE Hall of Famer Jerry Briscoe recalls the daunting creative challenge this presented. The creative team was essentially ordered to build a compelling character completely out of nothing. The result of this brainstorming was Mankind. It was a bizarre, dark persona that quite frankly would have failed miserably in the hands of any other performer. Only Mick Foley could take such a bogus, absurd concept, a man who pulled his own hair out in the ring, and make it work. Without Foley's deep psychological connection to the audience, the character would have been meaningless. The fans could sense his authentic commitment through the mask. Ross's ultimate goal was fulfilled. Mankind became an incredibly legendary opponent for The Undertaker. Foley was willing to try absolutely anything to succeed. As Jim Ross fondly noted, Foley would not turn anything down but his bed covers. This unmatched willingness to take risks created a new, massive challenge for the management team. They had to actively work to ensure Foley did not accidentally kill himself on live television. The Undertaker and Mankind proceeded to lay a massive foundation for the company. They battled across the globe, headlining 7 major pay-per-view events and competing in 10 national television matches. However, as is common in the entertainment industry, the Mankind character eventually reached a creative plateau. Foley recognized this stagnation and knew he had to do something drastically spectacular to elevate their legacy rather than detract from it. This brings us to the summer of 1998. The World Wrestling Federation producers made the decision to reignite the bitter rivalry between Mankind and The Undertaker at the King of the Ring event. They chose to utilize a newly developed match concept, Hell in a Cell. In traditional cage matches, a competitor could achieve victory by either climbing over the top of the steel mesh or escaping through the door. But this new concept was pitched differently. The idea was to put a solid roof on top of the cage, creating a scenario where 2 men enter, but only one walks out. The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had previously competed in the very first Hell in a Cell match, setting an impossibly high standard. That initial bout remains a technical masterpiece, leaving other performers open-jawed, wondering how they could possibly follow such a flawless performance. Knowing he lacked the athletic agility of Shawn Michaels, Foley felt the pressure mounting. Some 9 months after that inaugural match, Foley sought advice from his mentor, Terry Funk. When asked what they could possibly do to top the previous Cell match, Funk jokingly suggested that they should start the match completely outside the ring, up on top of the Cell roof, and that Foley should allow himself to be thrown off. It was meant to be a humorous, absurd exaggeration. But when the laughter faded, Foley looked at Funk with absolute seriousness and stated that he believed he could actually execute that fall. The idea embedded itself deep into Foley's mind. He began pitching the concept of being thrown off the massive structure in casual conversations with The Undertaker and Vince McMahon. It required an incredible amount of convincing. The Undertaker was extremely hesitant and was not initially on board with the idea of throwing his opponent off a steel structure, but Foley was dead set on the idea. Foley was not viewing this monumental match as the glorious second act of his career. Rather, he was acting out of pure survival instinct, trying desperately to keep his head above water in a cutthroat industry. He truly believed that once this specific program was over, his career at the top level would be finished as well. Foley confided the major details to The Undertaker, outlining the high spots and assuring everyone that he would be perfectly fine. The Undertaker placed his trust in Foley's vision, believing that if Foley could visualize the stunt, he could successfully perform it. As the event kicked off in the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, 16,000 fans packed the building, eagerly anticipating only the second Hell in a Cell match in history. The pressure resting on Foley's shoulders as he walked down the aisle must have been suffocating. He knew he had to outdo Shawn Michaels, and he knew he was not a nimble athlete. Referee Jimmy Corderas was part of the ring crew that night, while producer Jerry Briscoe sat at the command center, carefully monitoring the broadcast feeds. As Briscoe describes it, he was the pilot of the broadcast, sitting directly in front of the monitors with the absolute best seat in the house. No one in the arena, and perhaps no one in the back, truly knew what to anticipate, and absolutely no one could have imagined the horrors they were about to witness. Even the legendary commentary team of Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were kept completely in the dark, experiencing the match with the exact same shock as the fans watching at home. Foley's master plan was to begin the contest in a way that had never been attempted in the history of the sport. As Mankind made his entrance, he did not enter the door of the cage. Instead, he began to scale the outside wall. The shock on the faces of the crowd was palpable. Why was he going up? The match was supposed to take place inside the structure. Was this a psychological tactic to dare The Undertaker to meet him at the summit? Foley later confessed that despite assuring management he was comfortable with the stunt, he was actually terrified of heights once he reached the top. The entire time, The Undertaker's ominous entrance music echoed through the arena. Foley was internally panicking, wondering how he could gracefully climb back down without completely ruining his reputation and career. But he stayed the course, creating an immense psychological fear among the audience. Everyone knew something terrible was going to happen. They just did not know what. The top section of the cage was held together merely by zip ties. When The Undertaker joined Mankind on the roof, the structure groaned under the combined weight of 600 pounds of human mass. With every step they took, the metal mesh sagged violently by nearly a foot. The terrifying sound of zip ties snapping and popping echoed through the arena. The combatants were literally destroying the structure just by walking on it. Observers backstage began to realize the extreme danger of the situation. Foley attempted to execute a suplex on top of the fragile mesh, but The Undertaker quickly reversed it, realizing there was a highly probable chance that the maneuver would send both men crashing straight through the roof to the ring below. The two men traded heavy punches, slowly migrating toward the edge of the cage, directly above the broadcast announce tables. Those watching backstage were convinced that Foley would never actually take the plunge. The margin for error was simply too small, and the danger was far too great. Looking down from that dizzying height, The announce table looked like a tiny piece of dollhouse furniture. But as they edged closer to the precipice, the unthinkable happened. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind and viciously flung him off the edge. A 300-pound human being plummeted almost 20 feet through the air, hurtling directly toward the Spanish announce desk. The moment seemed to simultaneously freeze in slow motion and pass in the absolute blink of an eye. The sickening crash of a human body obliterating a wooden table echoed like an explosion. Hugo Savinovic, the Spanish commentator, barely managed to dive out of his chair before Foley flattened the area. The reaction was pure, unadulterated trauma. It felt exactly like witnessing a horrific automobile accident. The arena fell into a stunned silence, and the collective thought sweeping through the locker room was that they had just watched a man die. In a business known for wild stunts, this act of sheer violence stopped everyone dead in their tracks. It blew the minds of every single person watching. There seemed to be no logical way that Mick Foley would ever get back up. The audible gasp from the crowd was chilling. Colette Foley, watching at home with her 2 young children, desperately tried to soothe them by repeating that it was all fake, even as she was internally suffering a severe panic attack, fearing for her husband's life. The realism of the moment could not be denied. If The Undertaker had thrown him just a fraction too far, or a fraction too short, Foley would have violently struck the concrete floor or crushed innocent fans in the front row. Foley later revealed that in mid-air, his adrenaline took over, and he managed to twist his body just enough to land flat on the table, allowing the structure to absorb a fraction of the devastating impact and ultimately saving his own life. The broadcast team immediately switched into professional mode, attempting to capture the gravity of the situation while adhering to the strict unwritten rule that personnel do not interfere with the unfolding narrative. But the concern was palpable. The fans stood in shock as this man lay broken at their feet. Officials and medical personnel flooded the ringside area. Terry Funk was the very first person to reach Foley's side, immediately asking if he was conscious. Dr. Francois Petit, the resident medical expert for the company, sprinted from the backstage area. Dr. Petit was a highly unique individual, a martial arts expert, an actor, and a medical professional known for his ability to realign bones and fix performers so they could continue working. But this was beyond a simple realignment. Foley had landed terribly on his back and further damaged an already dislocated shoulder. The emergency medical technicians scrambled to figure out how to navigate a gurney through the wreckage, eventually forcing the production crew to raise the massive cell structure while the Undertaker remained perched on top. Foley was strapped to the stretcher. The officials, the fans, and the executives all believed the match was officially over. But as he was being wheeled down the aisle, the psychological drive for audience engagement kicked back into Foley's mind. He realized that the longer he prolonged the drama, the more deeply the audience would be invested. Against the frantic advice of everyone screaming at him to stop, Foley climbed off the gurney. He turned around, looked at the cage, and began to climb back up. The locker room watched in absolute horror. They questioned his sanity. They thought he was the craziest, most foolish individual in the history of the business. How could his battered body even manage the climb? Foley himself later admitted he had absolutely no clue how he was going to survive the rest of the match. But he had made a pledge to deliver a masterpiece, and he refused to back down. While everyone backstage believed the insanity was over, those closest to Foley knew the dark truth. There was a second stunt planned. The original narrative called for a chokeslam on top of the cage, which was intended to cause the metal mesh to gradually break apart, allowing the Undertaker to dramatically stuff Mankind through the hole. But as the Undertaker grabbed Foley by the throat and slammed him down, the structure completely failed. The mesh instantly gave way. This was not a planned, controlled descent. Mankind plummeted through the roof of the cage and crashed violently onto the ring mat below. The ring mat is deceiving. Beneath the thin padding lies solid, unforgiving wood and steel, feeling much like raw concrete upon impact. To make matters infinitely worse, a heavy, solid steel folding chair that had been resting on top of the cage fell directly behind him, striking him forcefully in the face as he hit the mat. The collective heart of the wrestling world stopped. This was a completely different scenario than the first fall. This was an unscripted, catastrophic accident. Backstage, executives screamed at the television monitors. Producers frantically tried to reach someone on the communication lines, but could not get through. Colette Foley watched her husband lying completely motionless and lifeless on the television screen, struggling with the impossible task of explaining to her children that their father was just acting. Foley was legitimately knocked out cold for the very first time in his professional career. The steel chair had caused immense damage, knocking a tooth completely out of his mouth. Medical personnel and officials rushed the cage once again. When Dr. Petit and Terry Funk reached him, Foley was entirely unresponsive. The Undertaker looked down from the broken roof and told Funk to check if his opponent was even still breathing. For 42 terrifying seconds, Mick Foley was lost to the world. Recognizing the severe danger, Terry Funk made a brilliant, improvised decision. He stepped up to The Undertaker and told him to attack him, deliberately shifting the camera focus and the audience's attention away from the motionless Foley, thereby buying the medical team precious time to evaluate the trauma. According to modern medical protocols, this match absolutely should have been stopped. But in that era, matches were rarely halted. They simply bought time. As Foley's consciousness slowly began to return, the very first thing his eyes registered were Terry Funk's shoes. Realizing he was still in the middle of a pay-per-view main event, Foley instinctively forced himself to stand. He was a horrific, bloody mess. Looking back, historians note that it is incredibly crazy that officials allowed a man who had just suffered a severe traumatic brain injury to continue competing. But Foley's mind, clouded by concussions, was solely focused on creating an unforgettable television image. Feeling a massive, gaping wound underneath his lower lip, Foley intentionally pushed his tongue through the hole in his face and smiled at the camera. Furthermore, the tooth that had been knocked out by the steel chair had become lodged inside his nostril. Medical professionals speculated that the tooth had fallen into his throat, and due to his heavy, desperate breathing, he had violently inhaled it back up into his nasal passage. The expressions of terror on the faces of The Undertaker, the officials, and the fans were entirely real. Looking into Foley's eyes, it was clear that nobody was home. Yet, in this state of severe trauma, Foley demanded that they introduce thumbtacks into the match. He purposely rolled his battered body through thousands of steel tacks, ensuring they embedded deeply into his skin. When adrenaline completely takes over, the human body no longer registers pain. The performer literally becomes one with the trauma. Foley's legendary stubbornness dictated that he would see the match through, come hell or high water. Finally, after 17 minutes of unrelenting horror, The Undertaker mercifully ended the contest, pinning Mankind for the victory. The 16,000 fans in Pittsburgh had just witnessed a spectacle unlike anything in recorded history. When the medical staff brought the stretcher back out, Foley waved it off, causing the crowd to erupt into absolute insanity. This deep, authentic display of resilience firmly cemented the fans in his corner forever. By risking his physical well-being so transparently, Foley allowed the audience to thoroughly believe in him. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of concern and anger. Colette Foley waited anxiously for his customary post-match phone call. When the phone finally rang hours later, she screamed at him, devastated that her children genuinely believed their father had died on television. Prior to this match, she trusted him to protect himself. After Hell in a Cell, his safety became a constant, looming source of profound anxiety. Backstage, Vince McMahon approached Foley. The chairman, who once refused to hire him, looked him in the eye, thanked him for his incredible sacrifice, and sternly made him promise never to attempt anything like that again. Meanwhile, Foley was so heavily concussed that he had to ask The Undertaker if they had actually performed the thumbtack spot, completely oblivious to the fact that Dr. Petit was actively plucking the metal tacks out of his flesh at that very moment. The physical toll was staggering. Foley suffered a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, a bruised kidney that plagued him for 6 weeks, the loss of 2 teeth, and required 15 stitches just to close the horrific wound under his lip. It remains unclear if he was even properly treated for the severe concussion he sustained. However, from a professional standpoint, the match was an unprecedented triumph. It completely changed the public perception of Mick Foley and sparked a massive career renaissance. Just 6 months after being viewed as an unmarketable mid-card talent, Mick Foley captured the World Wrestling Federation Championship. But success in this industry demands a heavy, continuous price. The roar of the crowd is an intoxicating drug, and Foley constantly felt the intense pressure to live up to his reputation as the hardcore legend. The bar had been raised so high that simply surviving was no longer enough. He felt a deep obligation to over-deliver for his opponents and his fans. Despite warnings from colleagues like Jim Ross, who cautioned him that his reckless style would eventually catch up with him, Foley continued to push the absolute limits of human endurance. Just 7 months after Hell in a Cell, Foley found himself in another barbaric situation: the infamous I Quit match against The Rock at the Royal Rumble. In this brutally violent contest, there was no stopping for excessive blood loss. Foley had explicitly instructed The Rock to hit him as hard as possible to ensure the violence looked authentic. The original plan called for Foley to take 5 unprotected steel chair shots to the head. Instead, in the heat of the moment, while handcuffed and completely defenseless, he absorbed a sickening 11 shots. Colette Foley, watching this unfold with her young children, describes it as one of the absolute worst days of her life. The brutality was sickening. As a result of this specific angle, Foley suffered legitimate brain damage on national television. His daughter Noelle notes the profound tragedy of her childhood. She does not possess a single distinct memory of her father ever wrestling, likely because her young mind blocked out the traumatic experience of watching him being beaten so severely. The realization that 11 unprotected strikes to the skull could have easily killed a normal person remains a haunting fact for the Foley family. Eventually, the medical community had to intervene. Multiple doctors warned Foley that if he continued to perform, he would inevitably wind up crippled. He began experiencing terrifying symptoms of cognitive decline, such as driving his car and suddenly being unable to remember where he lived, a direct result of suffering concussion upon concussion. Seeking a glimmer of hope, Foley booked an independent appointment with a neurologist. The doctor's verdict was definitive and chilling. He explicitly warned Foley that he should never step foot inside a wrestling ring again. The long-term consequences of this violent performance art are devastating. Science now heavily links repetitive brain trauma to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a terrifying, degenerative brain disease. For Foley, the physical bill for his fame has finally come due, and he is paying a steep price. His family lives in constant fear, deeply worried about what his mental and physical state will look like in 10 to 20 years. Yet, Foley refuses to surrender to the darkness. Recognizing that he cannot reverse the damage, he actively fights the decline. He performs spoken word tours, utilizing the stage time as vital mental gymnastics to keep his brain sharp and engaged. The stimulation of the live audience continues to keep him going. Rather than living in complete fear of the unknown, he chooses to appreciate the life he has built. Because, in the end, Mick Foley achieved exactly what he set out to do. He engaged in a fantasy form of combat, dressed in wild costumes, and sacrificed his physique entirely to earn the acceptance and love of total strangers. He craved the roar of the crowd, and he cannot condemn the violent path he chose without also acknowledging that it is the sole reason for his monumental success. For many years, Foley actually harbored a deep resentment toward the Hell in a Cell match. He fell into a dark, emotional place, frustrated that despite a long, storied career and extensive charitable work, he was universally known for only one single, horrifying night. He felt as though his other accomplishments meant nothing. But a conversation with The Undertaker changed his perspective. The Undertaker looked at his old rival and stated a profound truth. What they accomplished that night inside that steel structure will outlive them both. That realization allowed Foley to finally embrace his legacy. This was the exact reason he entered the treacherous world of professional wrestling, to create indelible moments of pure awe. Very few people on this planet possess the ability to leave a global audience in a state of absolute, breathless shock. Mick Foley is one of those rare individuals. The emotional weight of this journey is perhaps best encapsulated by a quiet moment shared between Foley and his daughter Noelle at the World Wrestling Entertainment Warehouse, stumbling upon the original, rusted Hell in a Cell structure. Foley reached out and touched the cold steel. The memories flooded back, and the hardcore legend began to cry. For a man who endured explosions, fire, and catastrophic falls without shedding a tear, the sheer magnitude of what he survived finally broke through. It was a stark reminder of how dangerously close he came to losing everything. Today, Foley acknowledges that there is no financial reward or championship belt significant enough to truly justify the risks he took. With the modern understanding of head injuries, the choices he made seem unfathomably dangerous. Yet, he stopped short of saying he would completely change his past. For Mick Foley, the professional wrestling ring was a massive canvas that allowed him to create a surreal, sublime, and violent form of performance art. It was a perilous, magical way to make a living. And on nights when the magic was real, when the crowd roared and the world stood still in disbelief, it was undeniably one of the most powerful feelings a human being could ever experience. Was it a masterpiece? Unquestionably. Was it a cautionary tale? Absolutely. The legacy of Hell in a Cell remains etched in the annals of history, a permanent testament to the extreme lengths a man will go to feel the love of the world. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. As a broadcaster who has spent a lifetime calling the action and analyzing the intricate, often chaotic world of professional wrestling, I have witnessed the highest of highs and the most devastating of lows. From the regional territories to the global dominance of promotions like World Championship Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling, and World Wrestling Entertainment, I have seen athletes push themselves beyond the limits of human endurance. But there are certain nights, certain moments that cast a long, dark shadow over the entire industry. Today, we are opening the vault on one of the most infamous, dangerously crazy masterpieces in sports entertainment history. A match that hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. The date was June 28, 1998. The event was the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view. The setting was the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, packed with 16,000 screaming fans. And the spectacle was The Undertaker versus Mankind inside the demonic structure known as Hell in a Cell. Before you can understand the sheer gravity of that night, you have to understand the mind of the man who willingly walked into the abyss. Everyone who gets into professional wrestling is looking for something they find missing in their own lives. For Mick Foley, the man behind the Mankind mask, it was an overwhelming need to be liked. Growing up, Foley was teased relentlessly. He discovered early on that if he could not make people love him, perhaps he could shock them, or even disgust them into paying attention. According to Foley's own recollections, this psychological drive began in his college years. As a sophomore, he once filled his mouth with red food coloring and took a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a concrete floor. When he spat out that bloody concoction in front of his dorm mates, he heard someone scream that it was the most disgusting thing they had ever seen. In that moment, Mick Foley felt power. He needed reactions, and he was willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to get them. This desire birthed a career built on staggering brutality. Long before he stepped foot in a World Wrestling Federation ring, Foley cut his teeth in the grueling death matches of Japan under the persona of Cactus Jack. The environment in Japan was built on realism and survival. It was not just man versus man. It was man versus the environment. Under the mentorship of the legendary Terry Funk, Foley engaged in violent, fiery spectacles involving barbed wire, C4 explosives, and unforgiving concrete. He spent his days watching 12 hours of Japanese wrestling tapes on a broken video cassette recorder, studying the psychology of pain. To Foley, a match was not successful unless he had trouble walking back to his hotel room. He did not enjoy the pain itself, but he loved his ability to endure it and sell it in a way that captivated an audience. Yet, despite his undeniable charisma and absolute commitment, the chairman of the World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon, wanted absolutely nothing to do with Mick Foley. According to industry veterans like Jim Ross, who served as vice president of talent relations at the time, McMahon did not think Foley was marketable. He did not fit the mold of a traditional, attractive superstar. It was an era of clean-cut, heavily regulated television, and Foley's chaotic style did not seem to gel with the corporate vision. But Jim Ross saw something extraordinary in Foley. The company needed a fresh, unpredictable dancing partner for their biggest attraction, The Undertaker. McMahon had been feeding giants to The Undertaker, and the results were completely dull. They needed a lunatic. McMahon finally relented, slamming his hand on a table and agreeing to hire Foley. But on one strict condition, Foley's face had to be covered. McMahon insisted they build a character out of nothing. And from that corporate dismissal, the tortured, deranged character of Mankind was born. Mankind was a revelation. Alongside The Undertaker, Foley laid a massive foundation, battling through 7 pay-per-view events and 10 television matches all across the globe. But by the summer of 1998, the character had plateaued. Foley knew he needed to do something drastic to cement his legacy. The company decided to reignite the rivalry using a relatively new concept, Hell in a Cell. The original cell match between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker had been a towering milestone. Foley, fully aware of his own physical limitations, knew he could not match the athletic prowess of Shawn Michaels. In a brainstorming session with Terry Funk, Funk jokingly suggested that Foley should start the match on top of the cage and get thrown off. What started as a joke embedded itself into Foley's mind. He pitched the idea to McMahon and The Undertaker. According to those involved, The Undertaker was highly reluctant to throw a human being off a structure that high, but Foley was completely dead set on the idea. When the night of June 28th finally arrived, the atmosphere inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena was thick with anticipation. Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were at the commentary desk, completely in the dark about what was truly planned. As Mankind's music hit, the fans expected him to step inside the cage. Instead, Foley began to climb. The moment Foley reached the top of that towering steel structure, a collective wave of anxiety washed over the arena. Foley later admitted that he was terrified of heights, yet there he was pacing on the roof, waiting for the dead man. When The Undertaker joined him, the sheer weight of 2 men, totaling over 600 pounds, caused the zip ties holding the roof together to visibly spring and break. The mesh was giving way by a foot with every step. Then came the moment that froze time. The Undertaker grabbed Mankind near the edge of the structure. From almost 20 feet in the air, a 300-pound man was flung helplessly toward the concrete arena floor. Foley plummeted through the air, crashing violently through the Spanish announcer table. The sound of the impact was like a horrific car accident. Backstage, producers, referees, and fellow wrestlers exploded in terror. Many legitimately believed they had just witnessed a fatal tragedy. The Spanish commentator, Hugo Savinovic, barely bailed out of his chair in time. Ringside personnel, including Terry Funk and World Wrestling Federation physician Dr. Francois Petit rushed to the lifeless body, surrounded by shattered wood and twisted metal. Foley was loaded onto a gurney. The match appeared to be over. But the mythology of Mick Foley was always built on the impossible. As the gurney began to move down the aisle, a bruised, battered Foley somehow regained consciousness. Against the pleading of everyone around him, with a dislocated shoulder and unimaginable pain, he climbed off the stretcher. With a horrifying smile, he began to climb the cell once again. What followed was not part of any script. It was a terrifying accident that nearly cost Foley his life. Back on top of the ruined roof, The Undertaker gripped Foley for a chokeslam. The plan was for the cage to slowly give way, allowing The Undertaker to push Foley down safely. Instead, the weakened steel panel completely broke open. Foley plummeted straight through the roof, plummeting toward the unforgiving ring canvas below. To make matters infinitely worse, a heavy steel folding chair followed him down, striking him brutally in the face upon impact. Foley was knocked completely unconscious. For 42 agonizing seconds, there was nobody home. Terry Funk rushed into the ring, desperately trying to buy time, even taking a punch from The Undertaker just to distract the audience while medical staff checked to see if Foley was still breathing. When Foley finally opened his eyes, the damage was catastrophic. He had suffered a concussion, a dislocated jaw, a bruised kidney, and 15 stitches were needed below his lip. Most shockingly, the chair had knocked 2 of his teeth out, forcing one of them upwards so violently that it became lodged in his nasal passage. In a display of terrifying resilience, Foley intentionally thrust his tongue through the massive hole in his lower lip, smiling a bloody, grotesque smile for the cameras. The match continued. Foley, running on pure adrenaline and an unyielding desire to entertain, demanded that thumbtacks be scattered across the ring. He was subsequently slammed into thousands of those sharp tacks, fully cementing his status as the absolute hardcore legend of the industry. The Undertaker eventually secured the victory, putting an end to a 17-minute war that permanently altered the landscape of professional wrestling. Backstage, the immediate reaction was a mixture of profound respect and genuine horror. Vince McMahon approached Foley, thanked him for everything he had done for the company, but firmly demanded that Foley never do anything like that again. But for Mick Foley, the bar had been raised, and his addiction to the roar of the crowd was too powerful to suppress. Just 7 months later, Foley found himself in another violently controversial bout. An I Quit match against The Rock. Against the advice of industry veterans, Foley allowed himself to take 11 unprotected strikes to the head with a solid steel chair, while his hands were bound behind his back by handcuffs. According to sources, the original plan called for far fewer strikes, but the situation spiraled completely out of control. Foley's wife, Colette, and his young children were sitting in the front row, watching in absolute terror as their father was brutally battered. For Colette, who had always trusted Mick to protect himself, the trust was deeply fractured. For his daughter Noelle, the trauma of watching that unmitigated violence wiped away all other childhood memories of her father's career. This brings us to the haunting question that echoes through the halls of wrestling history. When is it enough? We now know the severe, long-term consequences of repetitive head trauma. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a degenerative brain disease linked to repeated concussions, casts a massive shadow over Foley's legacy. Independent neurologists warned Foley years ago that he needed to step away from the ring entirely. The human body is simply not designed to withstand the impact of a 25-mile-per-hour car crash on a nightly basis. Today, Foley openly admits his fears about what his cognitive health will look like in 10 or 20 years. He experiences memory loss, occasionally forgetting where he lives while driving his car. To combat this, he performs spoken-word tours, treating the stage as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp and to continue feeling the warmth of an audience. The story of Hell in a Cell is a story of incredible sacrifice. Foley sacrificed his physical well-being, his long-term health, and the peace of mind of his family, all for the roar of total strangers. For years, he harbored deep resentment that his entire career was defined by a single match where he was famous simply for taking a fall. But over time, through reflection and conversations with his legendary opponent, Foley came to accept the magnitude of what they accomplished. According to those closest to him, a recent visit to a corporate warehouse brought Foley face to face with the original steel cell. Touching the rusted metal, the hardcore legend broke down in tears. It was a profound realization of his own mortality, recognizing just how easily that night could have been his last. Professional wrestling is a world where men and women dress in wild costumes and engage in a fantasy form of combat. But the gravity is real. The concrete is real. The pain is everlasting. Mick Foley transformed himself from an outcast into an icon, creating a surreal, sublime piece of performance art that will outlive everyone who witnessed it. We stand in awe of his courage. But as we close the book on this chapter of the dark side of the ring, we must look at the physical toll, the emotional scars, and the lingering medical fears, and ask ourselves one final, echoing question. Was it truly worth it? For decades, I have sat at ringside and witnessed the evolution of professional wrestling. I have seen triumphs that elevate the human spirit and tragedies that leave permanent scars on this industry. But if you ask anyone who truly understands the brutal reality behind the spectacle, they will point to one specific night. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring event, the world witnessed a spectacle that would permanently alter the landscape of sports entertainment. It was The Undertaker versus Mankind in Hell in a Cell. This was not just a match, it was a descent into absolute madness. A masterpiece of danger that forces all of us to ask a haunting question. When is the sacrifice simply too much? Hell in a Cell is a concept that hits you like a mallet to the consciousness. The original design of cage matches required competitors to escape by climbing over the top or leaving through a door. But this was different. According to the accounts of those who engineered it, the idea was pitched to the chief executive officer of the World Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon, with a chilling premise: put a roof on the cage. Both men go in, but only one comes out. The first iteration of this match featured Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, setting a standard that many considered to be a mile marker in the industry. It was an athletic marvel. But some 9 months later, Mankind, portrayed by the legendary Mick Foley, stepped into that steel structure with The Undertaker. And what unfolded was a match so shockingly violent. It blurred the lines between scripted entertainment and horrifying reality. To understand why a human being would subject himself to such unrelenting punishment, we have to look into the psychology of Mick Foley. According to the man himself, everyone who enters the professional wrestling business is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Foley, it was an overwhelming need to be liked. He was a young man who faced severe teasing, searching desperately for a way to claim his power. He recalls a defining moment during his sophomore year in college. Seeking a reaction, he took a swig of red food coloring and executed a flying leap off a bed, crashing onto a stuffed atom on a concrete floor. As the blood-red concoction spilled from his mouth, the horrified reactions of his peers did not bring him shame. It brought him a sense of immense power. He realized a dark truth that would define his entire career. If he could not make people love him, perhaps he could disgust them. He just needed to get a reaction. This insatiable drive to elicit a visceral response led him to develop the persona of Cactus Jack, a wild, uncontrollable brawler. He built his reputation in Japan, studying hours of Japanese wrestling tapes daily on a small black and white television. He was drawn to the realism and the profound storytelling of death matches. Alongside his mentor, the legendary Terry Funk, Foley engaged in explosive, fiery combats involving barbed wire, thumbtacks, and composition for explosives. He threw himself onto concrete floors, believing that enduring massive amounts of pain was the only way to prove he had done something truly special. Realism was his greatest tool. In his mind, he did not have a good match unless he physically struggled to get back to his hotel room. Yet, despite his massive cult following, the World Wrestling Federation initially had no interest in him. The company was operating in a very family-friendly, general audience era. According to former executive Jim Ross, Vince McMahon completely dismissed Foley, believing he was not marketable or attractive enough for a mainstream audience. But Jim Ross saw a unique psychology in Foley. The company desperately needed a chaotic dancing partner for their top star, The Undertaker. Eventually, McMahon relented, but with a harsh condition. He insisted they cover Foley's face, building a character entirely from scratch because he perceived Foley as a nobody. From that rejection, Mankind was born, a bizarre, deranged character who ripped out his own hair and thrived on pain. The audience connected instantly. Foley proved that without a genuine connection to the crowd, everything else is meaningless. As they approached the King of the Ring event, Foley felt his character had plateaued. He knew he was following the greatest Hell in a Cell match in history between Michaels and Undertaker. Acknowledging that he could not match their incredible athleticism, Foley sought advice from Terry Funk. In a casual conversation, Funk jokingly suggested that Foley should start the match on top of the cage and get thrown off. What was meant as a dark joke became an obsession for Foley. He pitched the idea to The Undertaker and Vince McMahon. Despite severe reservations from The Undertaker, Foley sold the idea perfectly. He viewed this match not as a second act in his career, but as a desperate attempt to keep his head above water. He was entirely prepared to make this his final run. As the match began inside the packed Pittsburgh Civic Arena, in front of 16,000 screaming fans, confusion swept through the building. Instead of entering the cage, Foley began to climb it. Even the commentators Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler were completely in the dark. Foley had assured management he was comfortable on top of the structure. But the reality was that he was terrified of heights. The entire time The Undertaker made his entrance, Foley stood nearly 20 feet in the air, secretly wondering how he could climb back down without ruining his career. When The Undertaker joined him on the roof, the structural integrity of the cell immediately failed. The top section was secured only by plastic zip ties. With 600 pounds of human weight pressing down, the metal mesh sagged by a foot. The terrifying sound of zip ties snapping echoed through the arena. The margin for error was completely erased. They moved toward the edge of the cage, hovering above the incredibly small Spanish announcer table. Then it happened. With one swift motion, a 300-pound man was flung from the sky. It was a moment that felt simultaneously like slow motion and the blink of an eye. The catastrophic crash of Foley's body destroying the table sounded like a horrific car accident. Backstage, producers, agents, and close friends exploded in pure panic. It was a terrifying spectacle where everyone genuinely believed they had just watched a man die. Colette Foley, Mick's wife, watched from home with their 2 young children, desperately trying to soothe them by claiming it was all fake, while secretly paralyzed by fear. The brutal truth of gravity could not be faked. According to medical personnel, including World Wrestling Federation physician Dr. Francois Petit, the fall was catastrophic. Foley landed terribly on his back, aggravating a dislocated shoulder. Emergency medical technicians rushed to the scene. The match was over. The legend was cemented. But then, the unthinkable happened. Foley, driven by an adrenaline rush and the realization that the audience was fully captivated, refused the stretcher. With a terrifying smile on his face, he climbed back up the cage. What followed was not part of any master plan. The next sequence was supposed to be a choke slam that safely dented the mesh roof. Instead, the roof completely gave way. Foley plummeted uncontrollably, crashing directly onto the unforgiving ring mat, which feels exactly like solid cement. Worse still, a heavy steel folding chair followed him through the breach, striking him directly in the face upon impact. This was the first time in his career that Foley was legitimately knocked unconscious. The silence in the arena was deafening. The expressions on the faces of The Undertaker, the referees, and the medical staff were filled with authentic dread. Undertaker stared down from the roof, instructing Terry Funk to check if Foley was even breathing. For 42 seconds, Foley had no memory of his existence. Back in those days, matches were not abruptly stopped. Instead, the performers bought time. Terry Funk provoked The Undertaker into a fight, taking a brutal punch just to draw attention away from the motionless Foley, allowing doctors a crucial window to assess him. When Foley finally regained consciousness, his first instinct was survival and showmanship. Seeing Terry Funk's shoes, he realized he was still in the match. With a massive, bleeding wound underneath his lip, he deliberately pushed his tongue through the open gash, smiling for the cameras to create an unforgettable television image. A dislodged tooth had somehow been propelled into his nasal passage. Against every medical protocol, he finished the 17-minute match, even rolling through thousands of steel thumbtacks to ensure the audience got their money's worth. The physical toll was devastating. 15 stitches under his lip, 2 lost teeth, a dislocated jaw, a dislocated shoulder, and a bruised kidney that haunted him for 6 weeks. Backstage, Vince McMahon approached him, expressing deep gratitude for his sacrifice, but issuing a stern warning. He made Foley promise never to do anything like that again. The match skyrocketed Foley to immense stardom within 6 months. The man McMahon once deemed unmarketable was the world champion. But the addiction to the roar of the crowd is a dangerous master. The bar was raised, and Foley felt immense pressure to live up to his title as the hardcore legend. Just 7 months later, he pushed those physical limits even further in a deeply disturbing I Quit match against The Rock. Handcuffed and defenseless, Foley had planned to take 5 unprotected steel chair shots to the head. Instead, in the heat of the brutal performance, he absorbed 11 sickening blows. His family, sitting in the front row, wept in sheer terror. His young daughter, Noelle, admits today that she has blocked out all memories of her father wrestling because the trauma of watching him suffer was too severe. That night, Foley traded his long-term cognitive health for a television storyline. Today, the legacy of Mick Foley is a complex tapestry of profound respect and chilling reality. Medical professionals explicitly warned him to stop, telling him that continuing would leave him crippled. He suffered concussion after concussion. The modern understanding of chronic traumatic encephalopathy casts a dark shadow over his legendary career. Foley himself admits to living with deep anxieties about his future cognitive function, utilizing spoken word tours as mental gymnastics to keep his mind sharp. When he recently visited the company warehouse and laid his hands on the original hell in a cell structure, the hardened veteran broke down in tears. It was a profound realization of the terrifying risks he took, a stark acknowledgement that he easily could have lost his life on that June night. He earned the love and awe of millions, creating moments that will undoubtedly outlive us all. He sacrificed his body for the authentic roar of strangers. As we look back at this dangerously crazy masterpiece, we are left to ponder the monumental cost of greatness. The pain was real, the drama was real, and the consequences will last a lifetime. Professional wrestling is an industry built on the grand illusion of combat. A meticulously choreographed ballet of violence where the lines between fact and fiction are expertly blurred to captivate millions. We are told the animosity is manufactured, the strikes are calculated, and the falls are controlled. But there are moments in the history of this theatrical sport where the illusion shatters. Moments where gravity takes over, where flesh and bone collide with unforgiving steel and concrete, and where the collective breath of an entire arena is stolen in a single, terrifying instant. On June 28, 1998, at the World Wrestling Federation's King of the Ring pay-per-view event, the world witnessed one of those very moments. It was a spectacle that would forever alter the landscape of professional wrestling and etch itself into the darkest, most awe-inspiring chapters of sports entertainment history. The Undertaker versus Mankind. The structure was hell in a cell, and the consequences, as we would soon discover, were chillingly real. To understand the magnitude of what transpired inside the Pittsburgh Civic Arena that night, we must first analyze the complex psychology of the man behind the Mankind mask, Mick Foley. Who was the man willing to subject himself to unrelenting, inhumane punishment? According to those who know him best, everyone who steps foot into the squared circle is searching for something missing in their own lives. For Foley, the drive stemmed from a deeply rooted psychological need for acceptance. As a child who endured relentless teasing, Foley developed an overwhelming desire to be noticed, to be liked, and to leave an indelible mark on those watching him. According to Foley's own recollections, this desperate pursuit of a reaction manifested early. During his sophomore year in college, he orchestrated a stunt that would serve as a grim foreshadowing of his professional career. He ingested red food coloring and launched himself off a bed onto a concrete floor, violently spitting up the simulated blood to the sheer horror of his peers. When a female onlooker cried out in disgust, Foley did not feel shame. He felt an intoxicating rush of power. He realized that if he could not force the world to love him, he could certainly force them to be captivated by their own disgust. He needed to extract visceral reactions. That profound psychological revelation became the foundation of the hardcore legend. Yet, this willingness to embrace extreme physical suffering stands in stark contrast to the man behind the persona. According to his wife of over 35 years, Colette Foley, the man she married is gentle, characterized by his kind eyes, his penchant for corny jokes, and his terrible sense of humor. Their wedding song was the classic, romantic ballad Beauty and the Beast. They were a unified team, and she possessed a deep understanding of his relentless commitment to his craft. But that commitment meant that when the adrenaline began to pump, Foley's sole objective was to ensure the audience left talking about the greatness of the show, even if it meant placing his own life in extraordinary peril. The drive to be unforgettable pushed him to increasingly dangerous extremes. As he navigated the wrestling territories, Foley developed the wild, chaotic persona known as Cactus Jack. He was charismatic, unusual, and seemingly unhinged. Jim Cornette, an agent and producer for the World Wrestling Federation at the time, observed that Foley possessed a masterful grasp of in-ring psychology. He understood that audiences were inexplicably drawn to chaos, to a performer who appeared to go completely off the script. Foley learned how to take the audience on a terrifying ride, eliciting exact emotional responses. The attention fueled him, and his reputation as a man willing to sacrifice his body began to grow. This reputation was forged in the grueling, violent arenas of Japanese professional wrestling. Foley's early living conditions were remarkably humble: a mattress on the floor, a small black and white television, and a videocassette recorder. He would obsessively consume up to 12 hours of Japanese wrestling tapes a day, studying the realism, the storytelling, and the concept that a wrestler must defeat not only his opponent, but the very environment around him. Japan, with its brutal death matches, seemed to be his destined path. There, he found a mentor in the legendary Terry Funk, a master of making audiences suspend their disbelief. Together, they engaged in explosive, bloody, fiery spectacles involving barbed wire, thumbtacks, and composition for explosives. Foley would find himself crawling on his hands and knees, covered in his own blood, viewing the agony as undeniable proof that he had achieved something truly special. However, the World Wrestling Federation during that era was a drastically different landscape. It was a general audience's era, carefully sanitized and heavily produced. Vince McMahon, the architect of the empire, initially had absolutely no interest in hiring Mick Foley. McMahon did not view him as marketable. He did not fit the traditional, muscular, attractive mold of a superstar. It took the persistent advocacy of Jim Ross, the vice president of talent relations, to convince McMahon to take a gamble on this unorthodox talent. Ross argued that the company desperately needed compelling opponents for their top attractions, specifically The Undertaker. McMahon was endlessly pairing The Undertaker with massive, lumbering giants, creating a stagnant, dull product. Ross knew that to create magic, The Undertaker did not need another giant. He needed a lunatic. According to backstage accounts, McMahon finally relented, slamming his hand on a table and declaring that he would bring Foley in, but only if his face was completely covered. McMahon's initial perception was that Foley was nobody, a blank slate to be molded. Gerald Briscoe, a legendary agent and producer, recalled the immense challenge handed down by management: build a character out of thin air. Thus, Mankind was born, a deranged, tortured soul who ripped out his own hair and screamed in agony. It was a bizarre, psychological experiment that would have failed miserably with any other performer. But Foley possessed a unique ability to forge a profound connection with the audience. Fans possess a sixth sense for authenticity. They can feel when a performer is genuinely committed to the art. Foley was willing to try absolutely anything, a trait that left agents like Briscoe constantly terrified that the performer might actually kill himself in the process. The rivalry between Mankind and The Undertaker became the cornerstone of the programming. They laid a massive foundation, battling across the globe in 7 pay-per-view matches and 10 television main events. Yet, as time marched on, Foley felt his character had reached a plateau. He was consumed by the dread of fading into obscurity and knew he had to orchestrate something spectacular to secure their legacy. As the 1998 King of the Ring approached, the company decided to reignite their feud using a menacing, imposing structure known as Hell in a Cell. The concept of the cell was born from Foley's own mind. Traditional cage matches in the World Wrestling Federation ended when a competitor escaped over the top or through the door. Foley approached McMahon with a chilling modification: put a solid roof on the cage. Both men go in, but only one comes out. The inaugural Hell in a Cell match had taken place months prior between The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, setting an unbelievably high standard. Foley, watching that first encounter, was left completely astounded. He recognized that he lacked the extraordinary athletic prowess of Michaels. How could he possibly follow a masterpiece? The answer came in the form of a dark, passing joke from his mentor, Terry Funk. Funk laughed and suggested that it would be incredibly funny if they started the match on the very roof of the cell, and Foley was subsequently thrown off. While Funk intended it as morbid humor, the idea took root in Foley's mind and refused to let go. The joke transformed into an obsession. Foley pitched the terrifying concept to The Undertaker and McMahon, casually selling them on the idea that he could survive the fall. The Undertaker was extremely hesitant, heavily opposed to the idea of throwing his opponent off a towering steel structure. But Foley was dead set on the stunt, eventually wearing down the resistance. He viewed this match not as a glorious second act to his career, but merely as a desperate measure to keep his head above water. He genuinely believed that after this run, his career would be over. The Undertaker, trusting Foley's conviction that if he could visualize the spot, he could execute it, finally agreed to the horrifying choreography. When the night of June 28th arrived, the atmosphere inside the arena was thick with anticipation and dread. The commentators, Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler, set the stage with grave warnings, noting that the loser might bypass the hospital and head straight to the morgue. As Foley made his agonizingly slow walk to the ring, the pressure must have been suffocating. Jimmy Corderas, a referee working the ring crew, watched from the backstage monitors alongside Gerald Briscoe, who was essentially piloting the broadcast. Nobody, neither the fans nor the executives in the back, could have possibly anticipated the trauma that was about to unfold. The initial shock wave hit the arena the moment Foley bypassed the cell door and began climbing the steel mesh to the roof. A collective gasp of confusion swept through the crowd. Why was he going up? The match was supposed to take place inside the structure. Foley had brazenly assured McMahon and The Undertaker that he was comfortable on top of the cell. But the reality was far different. Foley harbored a deep fear of heights. As he reached the top, suspended above the sea of